Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Sorry for the slight delay to the start. I just wanted to let a few more people join. Hopefully you can see and hear me. There is the Teams chat thread, which you should all be, I guess, used to using if you're using Teams. There's also a Q&A area. My name's Louis Welcomme. I'm the product director, product owner of the Pump application. Pump is a recruitment CRM and ATS built on Microsoft Dynamics 365 that can be tailored to your systems. Lisa, I met a few months ago virtually, and then we met up in Norfolk because we're both based in Norfolk. Don't let that undermine us. We chatted all about change management, project management, and how difficult that is for businesses and recruitment businesses looking to put new CRMs and ATSs in place, or indeed any system. I'd guess, Lisa, really this is going to be applicable to any rollout of any system. And we wanted to focus a bit more on today's webinar, which is only going to be 14 minutes, perhaps shorter, so we'll keep it short and sweet and practical. Today we're going to be focused on the human side of that, so more of the change management side, the culture piece of that, which is so important. I've seen recruitment system rollouts that have been purely treated as IT. I'm sure Lisa's seen that too, IT projects. I've seen rollouts where no recruiters or business people were involved, front end users, or that just become back office projects. And it really is, how small or big you are, it really is a change management project, I'd say, not to scare people off. Lisa's got a background in project management and change management and digital transformation across various global and smaller recruitment agencies, including McKinley, did a Salesforce rollout there over many years, and also Robert Half further back, and also experience with Bullhorn, Microsoft Dynamics 365 as well. So you are a neutral party, aren't you, Lisa? So if you want to get in touch with Lisa, I put her LinkedIn address in the chat. Feel free to connect with her. I put myself in there as well. So I think that's it from me. I'm going to mostly keep quiet, and I'm going to hand over now to Lisa.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louis. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you everyone for attending this morning. Obviously, we're all busy people, so I appreciate you taking the time out, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of my insights with you and give you some practical things for you to take away in terms of any projects that you might do in the future. So I am going to share a few slides with you. It is not going to be death by PowerPoint, I promise. It's quite a relaxed session. As Louis said, you've got the chat there. So if you think of questions, we've got a question. We've set aside some time at the end for questions. So if you want to write anything in the chat, we can then keep an eye on that, and then we'll come back to those at the end of the session. And obviously, any questions you have post, then obviously let us know. Okay, so let me get into it a little bit more. So Louis obviously introduced myself. So yes, I've run more implementations than I probably care to remember, actually, across lots of organisations globally. And obviously, as I've done those, I've picked a lot of things up along the way, things that you should do, and equally things that you shouldn't do, or things that have worked well and things that haven't worked well. So really, this session is to share that with you so that you get some practical tips to take away. So yeah, let's get into it. I guess the reason we called it the human side to a successful CRM implementation is projects fundamentally they need to run in a certain way. So you need project management, but what's often missed is that human element. So that diagram there is obviously we've got the process. That sometimes is quite successful in terms of how that's run. We've got the system itself that you're implementing, but you've got the people. And what's often underestimated is the people. They are absolutely crucial to any project. So it isn't just having them involved, it's how they're involved, what they're doing, who they are. So we're really going to get into that in this session. So what we're covering, I will do a bit more of an intro, and then we'll get into a little bit around project management. I don't want to diminish the fact that project management isn't important. And often I think it's important to distinguish between what project management is and what change management is. So I'm going to cover both of those for you. Then we're going to dig much more deeply into change management so that you get an understanding of what are the elements, what's important, and particularly with a CRM implementation. We're then looking at how do you build a change management plan. Project plans are important, but the change management plan within that is equally as important. So we're going to talk about that. And then kind of bring that human side to life. Then it's always good to know what to avoid. So I'm going to share some things that you should avoid. And that is based on a number of projects that I've implemented. And then what the key takeaways are around what we've discussed. So that's what we're going to cover today. As Louis said, we've got about 30 minutes now set aside for this, but there will be time at the end for you to ask questions. So when you implement a CRM, and some of you may have done this already in the past, or it might be something that you're looking to do in the future, it takes a significant amount of time and effort and expensive. And where I see often is the CRM goes in and fundamentally nothing really changes. So it's important to get that right first time. You want to make sure that when you put all that effort in, the company's spending a lot of money, a lot of time. You guys are often the people getting, you're needing to do the work. So you want to get it right. And the people that you're working with is crucial in order to get that right. So really, when you're building, you're thinking about putting a CRM in, you want to make sure that you understand what people you need to make that successful. And that's where the change management piece comes in, around making that essential. And then you need to plan for that, because you want it to be successful. It needs to be successful. We've all got limited time and funds, so we need to make sure that we get it right first time. So that's really what I'm arming you with. So in terms of project management versus change management, often they're just merged into one. And change management is just communication. Yeah, we'll just write a couple of comms and then that's good. We've done our change management. So I'm about to show you that that's not enough. You need to make sure that you really treat it as part of the project. So what is the difference between project management and change management? The easiest way to describe this to you guys is if you think of project management as process. Processes are required in order to make a project successful. It needs to be fully planned. You need tasks associated to that project. You need your budget set. We haven't got unlimited funds. You need to set a timeline. You then need to have a start, finish, all the different milestones, all the pieces that if you've done any projects in the past, I'm sure you'll know and love. And that's all your process. Then you need to obviously think about, okay, if you then run your project just like that, potentially you've got a group of people who are going to be using your new CRM and they really don't know anything about it because you've just run it, as Louis said earlier, like an IT project, right? I've got a system, we're going to put it in, but no one's really been involved. So that's where change management is the game changer, to make sure that your people come along with you. It's the human side of the project. So how do we get people engaged? The engagement piece is absolutely crucial. I mentioned often change management is comms, but communication is important. But how do you communicate? What method do you use? Who do you communicate with? All of those pieces need to be thought through. Resistance management. Not everyone wants a new system. Somebody has decided, that's what often is thought, someone made a decision somewhere that we need to replace our system. Okay, well, where's that decision come from? What's the reason for that decision? Why do people not understand that decision? So resistance isn't necessarily a bad thing, but people need to understand it to get to grips with, okay, how does it impact them? Then you've got adoption. So how do you get people actually using the new system? We talked about the plan. So I've got project plan on the left and change management plan on the right. I'm going to talk a bit about how they kind of integrate, but fundamentally you need those two plans. And that way, that will run in tandem. So you've got your project management on one side, your change management, but actually that's all integrated in order to make your project successful. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is just talk a little bit more about project management, just to give you some of the tasks within that, and just again to let you picture how it kind of all weaves together. So in terms of project management, discovery is absolutely crucial. You need to obviously make sure that you understand what the project is, what's happening, why. I mentioned before, because again, some of what you're doing in project management will help you in terms of what you're going to do with change management. Have your plan in place, and obviously make sure that you're regularly checking that that plan is actually on track. Again, this session isn't really about project management, but I'm just putting a few tips along the way, because often a plan's put in place and no one actually checks that they're on track for the plan, the date doesn't shift, and then the project doesn't actually deliver what it needs to the timelines that you've agreed. So this planning phase is absolutely crucial. Then we talk about tasks. So obviously you need to understand all the tasks for your project, what resources you need, when they're going to be completing. Again, I'm not here to tell you that you've got a finite amount of time and you can do a project, and it can take as long as you need it to. You've got to balance that, how much time you have, what resources you have, and making sure that from a budgetary standpoint, you can obviously deliver what you need to. So it is a balancing act, but they're things that obviously can help you ensure that you do stay on track. We just talked about the budget. So obviously, yes, understand your costs, manage those costs and report out on those costs. And we mentioned the timeline. So milestones are crucial in any project. They're checkpoints, making sure you're on track. And then obviously kind of risks and dependencies. And like I said, I'm not here to kind of get too deep into some of these pieces. That could be another session, Louis, if that was ever needed. But I thought it's important to not just launch straight into change management, because sometimes it's a balancing act between making sure your project's being managed and making sure that your the change elements of that project are part of that whole piece. So what is change management? I suppose what I often do with people is get you to think about how you actually feel about change. So I was just going to ask you, you can put it in the chat if you like, or you can just write it on your piece of paper. But what's your appetite for change? Are you somebody who readily accepts change, loves change, so you're maybe a 10, or you're somebody that maybe resists change and you might be a 1? Have a think about where you might fit on that spectrum. And then think about the people that you work with. Brilliant. So people are putting some comments in the chat. So yeah, we've got people on here that are quite, which in some ways doesn't surprise me in probably the arenas that you all work in, because probably things are changing for you quite frequently. But the teams that you work with, step back a minute and think, well, where are they on the spectrum? They might be more like a 5, which is middle of the road. They're not anti-change, but perhaps change is more challenging for them. Or you could even have people lower down that spectrum, which might be like 2s and 3s, who really do struggle with change. And again, it's not, it's nobody, you don't really, we're not saying a 10 is good and a 1 is bad. It's just you need to actually realise yourself, kind of how do you accept change, how others might accept change, to then maybe help to understand then why people might feel the way they do or might be a bit more resistant. So let me jump into engagement for a little bit. I've highlighted the word all. Sometimes with change management, people just say, oh, we just need, Fred. I'm going to call him Fred. We just need Fred because he's got loads of time. So we'll have Fred and then we're good because we've got Fred involved. Well, that's just Fred, and Fred's maybe the finance person or the ops person, or isn't really going to use the system, or is maybe one of the managers, but we aren't talking to anybody on the ground. So identifying all the people that you need in the project is absolutely crucial. So in project management, we talk about stakeholders and executive sponsors, project sponsors. You need all those roles. Sometimes they can be the same people, but often they shouldn't be the same person, because the executive sponsor is somebody ultimately at the top of the tree, responsible for the whole piece, and is very money focused, time focused, just wants it delivered. Your project sponsor, on the other hand, is more hands-on involved in the project, and yes, they need it delivered, and yes, they're worried about the budget, but they're more practical in terms of making sure that the project is a success, not just focusing on those two things. Then you get your stakeholders. So who are they? They would be your users, but again, lots of different users, or really management team, I guess. And maybe they don't really use the system as much as the key users, like we've established there. So I've got more to go into engagement, but that at a high level is where we need to start at. So there's a lot of work to identify those people, to make sure that you're working with the right people. When you communicate, people don't often know why. I might say to you, can you go and, I need you to go and work on this spreadsheet. But if you don't know why you're doing it, you don't know how important it is, you don't know the impact of what you're actually going to be doing, you're not necessarily going to put in the effort that's required, or you may get it wrong because you haven't got all the information that you need to populate the spreadsheet correctly. So that why is absolutely paramount. So why are you thinking about putting in a CRM? If you then decide you're putting the CRM in, do you now know what's that story that you're going to tell people? And what's the outcome? What are you hoping to achieve? Because if I'm over here using your current CRM and I'm quite happy, you're telling me I'm now about to use a new CRM. What you're about to do is disrupt my world. So I'm not happy about that. So I need to understand, what is it as a business? What is it that I potentially am going to get from this new system? How do you communicate with me? Some people love pictures, some people love words, some people love video. There's so many different ways. So you need to look at different methodology. And then what language are you going to use? If I start to say, so we're going to put the CRM in and it's going to integrate with these APIs and we're going to do this piece, and it all becomes very technical, again, you're going to lose your audience. So we're going to come on a little bit more around communication. Resistance management, you need to listen. I can't stress that enough. People do tell you stuff, but we don't always listen because we have our own agendas. You need to get people involved. You need their feedback, and you need to make sure that you give it time. So again, we're going to talk about time a little bit more as we go through. Then adoption, how do you get people to actually use the system? Getting them involved at testing, training, the whole support piece and the whole success piece. All of those elements are absolutely crucial to make sure that teams are involved right throughout the project. So what I'm now going to do is talk about the plan, and I'm going to come back to those 4 pieces, by the way, just to emphasize how that then works within the plan. So by the end of the call, then you'll have those pieces that you know that you could build yourself. So I'm sure you've all built project management plans. So the best thing to do with change management is have it as a work stream. So you might have a data migration work stream. That's all the tasks I need for the data migration in order for my CRM to move from A to B. You then have all your tasks for requirements that you need. What do you want the system to actually do? If you have change management as a work stream in your project plan, you can then make sure that all the tasks that are required for change management are lined up in the plan, and they will happen at the same time. It's not 2 projects, it's 1 project. So you need to make sure that that is built in to the project plan. In terms of roles and responsibilities, if you've got someone running the project, so you've got a project manager within the business, they will need that change management element to be embedded in the plan, but they may not be the best person to execute on that plan, as in that work stream for change management. Sometimes change management, as we're saying, is not really thought through because it's being run by a project manager who's really focused on, this is the date we need to deliver, this is what we're going to do. That is so important, but you need someone else who's then saying, yes, but we haven't got the training sorted, or we haven't got the right people involved, so we need to make sure that that's bedded into the project. So you can think about who you have in your business that might take on that task, because I appreciate if you're running these types of projects, you might bring in people to actually help out, but equally you might look at your own resources in-house. So have you got people, say, within an L&D environment, or have you got people who want to do like a stretch assignment that are, might have some sort of background that would suit this type of work? So think about kind of who you might have. And then they would then be responsible for that work stream aligned with that project manager. Timeline is important. The project will have a timeline, so the change management plan needs to fit within that timeline. So all the tasks for change management will then need to fall to make sure that the right things happen at the right time. Milestones can help too, which you would always have in a project plan. So you'd have them here, and there'd be checkpoints to make sure that the business is ready to go when the system's ready. And then people talk a lot about return on investment. So you're spending all this money replacing a CRM, you're putting all this effort in. So we need some measurement around, okay, so are people actually using the system? What are the key requirements of the system? So are we then getting that return on investment? We might be putting in more automation, for example. So we can then measure to see those automations going in, what's actually happened, are we getting outcomes, are we getting more business ultimately, and fundamentally more money, which is what it would all be around. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is, I've spoken a lot obviously around the change management piece already, but I've just put together a little bit more detail on some of those headlines again, just to bring it to life. So we talked about the human side. So what is it about all these elements that will make it successful for you? So you've got your plan, you're going to engage, you're going to work with your teams, you're going to communicate, you're going to manage resistance, you're going to look at adoption. But let's dig in a little bit more about how you're going to do that. So let's talk about engagement first. So we talked about all the people. I'm now going to tell you the right people. So I mentioned Fred, I called him. People often nominate people for projects. They're not always the right people for your project. You need to understand kind of who you need. So you've got different roles. So if your project touches finance, you need somebody from the finance team involved. If it touches marketing, which CRMs generally do, you need marketing involved. You can't just have the management team involved, because guess what? Often they're not always the users of the system. They do use it, but they use it in a very different way. They use it to report, look at stats, but they're not necessarily doing the day-to-day. So you need to look at all the people and work out kind of how many people do you need based on the size of your business. Get them from cross-functional teams and different perspectives. Maybe someone who's come new into the business, they're not necessarily going to have some of the same challenges around change because they're not used to the old system. Someone who's used it for 10 years might be a bit more set in how they do their work. You do, however, need some authority. So obviously, ultimately, you can't design or do everything by committee. So I've just put that in there to make sure that when you set the teams up, you've got the right levels. So it's all levels really, to make sure that those people are engaged. And then it's from the start and throughout. Change management comms is often always at the end, right? We need it for just training, that's it. No, you need it at all stages. So discovery, requirements, development, testing, training, go live, post-project. They're all standard project management levels, but I put them in there just as a reminder. Have regular touch points. Again, it's not just here's some comms, right, we've done that, and break it down for people into little chunks, and then be honest and transparent. I can't stress that one enough, actually. Often with systems, people kind of go into a bit of a sales mode. Oh, the system's going to do this, or oh, don't worry about that. And then later on, they find out for whatever reason it doesn't do that. Obviously, you want to, this is a new product, it's going to give you lots of new and exciting functionality. But sometimes it might mean you have something you do today that might be a bit more challenging. So it's just approaching that in the right way, but not getting to the point where you get to training and people look at the system and go, well, I didn't think it was going to do that. Because that's where, again, that change becomes very difficult to manage. This is just a visual. You're not probably going to absorb that instantly, but the reason I picked it is because communication is complicated. How we communicate, what we do, and how we say it, what methods we use, it's all not straightforward. We all absorb things in different ways. So I think it's important for us all to just step back and think, what methods do we have? How do we actually communicate with our teams? You might have town halls, you might have team meetings. Is it appropriate for the project manager to make the statement, or actually the line manager would be the best person to communicate it? Use all your different channels, use all your different people, because I didn't mention it when we were talking about the right people, but actually there are all influencers in our business. We hear about influencers in social media, but who has the chats at the I want to say the water cooler, that's very an American term really, but you know, who has the chat by the coffee pot kind of thing? It's like those sorts of people, you want to just have your ear to the ground as to who do people listen to, who do people think are the right people to get their advice from. So it might be that they're the people that want to become your mouthpiece in terms of talking about the project. So yeah, use communication in all the ways that you can. And use all methods. Apparently it takes approximately 5 to 7 times for people to absorb certain information. So you might have to tell your story different ways at different times to make sure that people come with you on the journey. Okay, managing resistance. So we've talked a little bit about this already, and we talked about listening, but I think education is really important. So educating people, understanding or them understanding what you're actually doing. Surveys. I don't know if anyone does surveys in their business currently, but these are great. Readiness surveys before you start a project. What's the appetite for people wanting a new CRM? What are their pain points? Understand your audience, and then halfway through the project, you can do another touch point, right? You will have communicated, you'd have potentially shown them the product. What are their views currently? Where's the resistance? You can help manage that. And then towards the end of the project, you can do it again. Only short questions. I'm not talking about 20 questions. It's just 3 or 4 really strategically placed understanding questions where you ask an open question and you get information back. That's absolutely invaluable. We've talked about stakeholder management, and I suppose linked surveys to a degree, but make sure you always get continuous feedback. What are the pain points we said about the system? What are they looking for out of a new system? And showing them the new CRM. In terms of adoption, I guess you really do need to start this right at the beginning. But the reason I've started at testing is because until they can kind of really touch and use the system, that's the piece when adoption kind of really kicks in. But often people go straight to training. So make sure, again, when I talked about having the right people, make sure you get the right people testing the system for you, because they can tell you so much. They can also aid and help with training. help with the launch, make sure you've got the right support in place, and then celebrate success. Launch and celebrate success. I've seen, you know, little things like having a cake on launch day. I know that's really quite a minor thing, but again, what excites your teams? What do they, you know, do they like making a big deal of things? Often in recruitment, you know, when you make a placement, it's a big deal. You're launching a system, it's a big deal. So make it a big deal in the office. And then as people start to use the system, let's celebrate that. Let's actually find out what's been successful when they've been using it. Because again, I can say the system's great, but if someone's used it and gone, do you know what? I managed to get my 5 clients and I sent them sent them a mailing, or I sent them information and I did it like that, that's going to mean so much more. Or I've suddenly got more candidates available to place. I found a candidate that I couldn't find before in the old system. All those sorts of things kind of need to be shouted from the rooftops. Equally, they're not going to like everything. So listen to what they don't like and obviously prioritise it. People do like to moan, clearly, but it's understanding listening again, what do they actually want to tell us? And then keeping them involved. Again, this would be a different webinar, but fundamentally, when you put a system in, that's not the end. The system goes in, and that's then a journey from then on in terms of how do we use that product? How does that product evolve? So that's why I'm saying about keeping the team involved. But like I said, that would be another webinar probably. So I appreciate, want to give you an opportunity to ask a question at the end. So we're just about there. So really, to summarise in the next couple of minutes for you, what do you need to avoid? So we talked about being clear with messaging. So, and understanding, people need to understand why, what the outcomes are, what your objectives are as a business. And that's often totally not, you know, people just know we're getting a new CRM, but they don't know what the business objectives. Why do you even select that CRM? What was it about that CRM that was right for our business? Having the right people involved, we talked about. Time is key. Make sure you're involved in that project plan so that you have the time, engage people at the beginning, all the way through the process. So fundamentally, by the time they get the system, in the nicest way, they know everything about it already. So they're ready to go. That's the whole point. You don't end up, it's going to be a disruption. So you need to bring them along with you so that you minimize that disruption at the end. Make sure you share the right information at the right time. If the product's not built yet, don't show it to them. Show them some screenshots, show them a very brief demo. But when the time's right and the system has got more in it you can show them, then you can show them. So it's really important to share at the right time. And don't just push the project agenda. It's got to be, we're all in this, we're building a CRM together. The project is managing that through, but the project doesn't dictate all of that. It facilitates it. And you won't win over everyone. You could spend your whole time about the person that's being quite difficult. Yes, you need to understand why they're being difficult, but they just might be the person that's done the same thing for the last 15 years. Bring the rest of the team along, and then they will come along with the rest of the team. But you can't put all your efforts into that one person, because trust me, that will just, you and them would probably lose the will to live. So what do you want to take away from this, apart from maybe it's lunchtime, so you want to eat a pizza? Project management and change management go hand in hand. Build a plan. Make sure you've got all the people, and make sure it's the right people and they're all the way through the process. Communicate, listen, and then communicate again. Keep that as a cycle throughout. Keep those doors open so you're hearing what people are saying and you're then communicating what needs to be said. If those people are involved in the project, there's accountability. So I haven't talked about that really as we've gone through. It's kind of a given, but when you bring people along for the journey and give them tasks, they have some accountability. I've even written job descriptions to give people an idea of what their role is and how much time it's going to take them in the project. Because again, everyone's busy. That's why you need different people, but they know that 2 hours a week for the next month, this is what you're going to need. So give them some accountability. Work through resistance. It's not a bad thing. Everyone thinks, oh, it's conflict. I don't want those conversations. You need to understand it so you can work through it together. And then adoption fundamentally equals return on investment. What is your return on investment? What are you looking for in terms of the system to make sure that that's measured and everybody understands? Okay, so I know there was a lot of information there, so I appreciate I've been talking at you for the last half an hour. I've been really interested in the last 5 minutes of what questions you do have. Again, if you don't want to shout them out, you can put them in the chat, or clearly you can contact myself or Louis afterwards. But has anyone got any questions that they want to ask now?
Commenting, writing at the moment. I had a few thoughts, but I'll let others go first. That was really good. Thank you, Lisa, by the way. I think some people have commented on that already. Oh, someone's just mentioning Monday.com as a system for managing it. Yeah, if you have any tools, Lisa, you can recommend or methodologies, that might be useful on that point.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm akin to any particular system. I think, as you said, there are lots of systems out there in terms of helping you manage it. I think for me, what this session was more about is stopping and understanding what change management is, so that then you can put that into a system that you would want to potentially manage it through. But yeah, it's more just, as I say, the human side. We're all people. We all want, the CRM to be successful, but you've got to actually stop and think about the impact to the people that fundamentally use that system. That's where you need to kind of stop and make sure that project takes them with you. Because if they're not with you, then all you're doing is building up issues later. Even if it's not really an issue, people actually make it up as well. Well, I haven't seen the system. Well, I don't think it's going to do that. And suddenly they're having those conversations.
Yes,
and
I was never invited to be involved with things
correct.
like that. Yes.
Correct.
Well, the emails weren't read. Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe emails aren't good enough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a case in point. I think on the point of whatever tools you are using, making sure they're transparent and making sure you get the message out is important. So it's not just a behind the scenes, again, IT, job, and away you go. I think Jacob's, oh, hold on, we'll go with Martin first. You can see these, can't you, Lisa? Really useful.
Yeah.
What level of disruption
should we
factor in?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. As I said, I think if you manage the change appropriately, then you help minimize that disruption. But I think you have to say, like with the training and the time it takes, everyone should be fully trained. I don't underestimate the time that's needed there. And also afterwards, those first couple of weeks, you're going to expect teething problems with the system. So I think you just set those expectations, and even that first morning, there might be certain things that you say to people, don't look at reporting day one. You might not want to be running mailings. There's certain things in those initial stages. So I think, again, if you communicate and you're open, I think you can minimize that. Putting a percentage on it is a bit difficult because it depends how much of that you've done. But I've run systems where by Monday lunchtime, it's gone in and everyone's gone, I can't believe how smooth it is. Now, I'm not saying there aren't little issues that then come up during the week, but people are then getting used to it and starting to use it. So for me, those first couple of days, if you've done this right, then you shouldn't have a huge amount of disruption.
I think your points on not doing everything at once is a good one. You want a clear objectives and long-term plan and strategy of where you want to get to, which will ever evolve and change. It'll change every week, every month. It's business priorities and tools change, and you spot things on LinkedIn. But don't try and do it all at once. We have the concept, or it's not our concept, it's a lean concept, minimum viable product, right? So decide what your business priorities are. We'll achieve that for go live, and we'll do that after. So you don't necessarily need to get your marketing team off their siloed platform in phase one. For example, or deal with every department at once. But you do want every department, I guess, invest in the long-term vision of where things are going.
I think what Jacob's saying about aligning
it ties
decision.
into that.
Yeah, it ties into that. I mean, I would talk to them individually on their needs, but then bring them together in terms of, so finance will have certain aspects of the system, but it's not a finance system, but you need to feed finance. You need to understand finance's requirements, and then where there's a crossover, that's where you bring those into discussion in terms of aligning those decisions and kind of prioritizing. It is a bit of a difficult one because finance fundamentally always think, you know, you've got to ultimately get the placement, you've got to pay. That's the most important thing, but the process to get there they don't necessarily own. So it's trying to balance that piece. But I make sure you've got the groups kind of set up, you're talking to them individually in terms of understanding their requirements, and then where there's crossover, getting them in the room and understanding each other's viewpoints so that you can get that agreed as a group.
On that point, sorry, Lisa, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and then ultimately, when I talked earlier about authority, you
Yeah,
do need a bit of an authority figure to have like the final say, like who, you know, once you've facilitated that conversation, if there is a, well, we think this and they think that, then that's where you need that authority figure to come in and work with you to say, okay, let's look at the pros and cons and let's make that decision, because it's probably not finance's decision and it's not Ops's decision. It's probably a decision of someone else who's slightly removed from it, because finance will want what they want, ops will want what they want. So yeah, there's no kind of easy magic bullet for that, but the conversation, the information, if that's all discussed, then I think you're a lot more open with it. I think people can come to a much more of a compromise rather than them doing it in isolation.
That point's really interesting.